Hi, it's Talkback, and we're here on June 17th, 2025, with a good friend, a lawyer, a blogger, a politically active-minded civic person, John Wirzbicki. Hi, John.
Hello.
Hi, it's good to see you. So I'm
You
going to
too.
pick your brain because over the years, you've always been politically involved, very active in blogging and writing all your thoughts, right?
Right. And I'm also involved with the local Democrats in Groton, where I live. I'm the treasurer for the Groton Democrats, which is nice because it means that I don't have to make phone calls and stuff. I can confine myself to that part of it
Yeah.
because I'm terrible at phone calls.
Well, the phone calls are, well, like you and I go way, way back, probably about 50 years in the Democratic Party in Connecticut. And the phone calls used to be kind of interesting. People actually picked up their phones back then. Now you mostly get voicemail or you get some gruff person telling you to go whatever.
Well, we had some folks that there was one woman who was a member of the town committee who was absolutely incredible on the phone. She would get on the phone with somebody and she would talk them into coming out to vote, and she was wonderful, but it's not my style.
But I've said that since I was also a teacher at one point. I always say if you reach one child in your entire career and save one life, that's good. So if you're on that phone and you're getting terrible reception, nobody's answering, people are hanging up on you or saying terrible things, but if 1, 2, or 3 people actually go to the polls because you made that call, it's golden. That's the whole story.
Yeah.
So it worked, But I think we're doing more postcards now. We're doing other more modern ways of communicating.
Right. Yeah. We've spent a lot of time. A lot of our members have spent a lot of time doing postcards to other states. When there's elections, special elections, to get people to go out, and
calls to other states too.
Right.
So sometimes at the last minute when it's for 3 hours earlier in California or Texas or whatever. So yeah. Anyway. We'll talk a little bit about that, but let's go back. You and I were talking earlier, we love history. You have children who are involved in history, a professor's son and another one who writes for the newspaper. How did you develop your love of history and your interest in it?
Well, when I was a kid, I remember when I was in 4th grade, the nun that was my teacher told us that whoever read the most books in the course of the year would get a prize at the end of the year. So we had to read a book and do a book report, and she had all of our names on the board, and every time we submitted a book report, she'd put a little book next to our name so we could see who was ahead. And so I was basically in competition with Margaret Clark to do. And
what grade was this?
4th grade, and I
Did you read every single book?
I read about something like 60 or 70 books in the course.
Every word?
And a lot of history.
No cheating. Because some people, what do they use, those summary things? Some people.
No, I didn't even use Classics Illustrated, which I could have very easily done.
Watch the movie.
But one of the books that I read then was something my father had put down the cellar, and I still have this book. It was Citizen Tom Paine by Howard Fast.
Howard Fast, wasn't he a novelist?
Well, this was a biography of Tom Paine, and I was just fascinated by it, and it really, I think it's one of the things that made me go to the political left where I am. I mean, it was just an incredible book, and still have it, and I'm waiting to give it to my grandson when he gets old enough to read it. But anyway, I just started reading a lot of history. Back then, in the library, they had all these the landmark books and those kind of things, and I just read quite a lot of those. Although, looking back, I realized that they made heroes out of people who weren't, like Bedford Forrest. That some of these Confederate people who they made out to be heroes, and I was just a kid. I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, you realize that it.
Well, what did you learn about the Confederacy in elementary school?
Well, I realized that they were wrong, and we were certainly taught. I mean, there's a lot of things you can say about the Catholic school system, but we certainly were taught that slavery was wrong. And in fact, I'm trying to remember. I think it was sometime in grammar school. We actually had a debate about whether slavery was a sin or not.
Really? This was at a parochial school.
Right.
At what town? What
Hartford.
In Hartford.
Our Lady of Sorrows.
Okay.
And our school cheer was "Go Sorrows Go," I was on the "it is a sin" side, but the nun, believe it or not, said no, it's not a sin. But
well, there's lots of slavery in the Bible, isn't there?
absolutely, yeah, I know. But anyway, I never changed my mind on that.
But on the Confederacy thing, it's interesting that you learn that it was only until the Jim Crow era that the South really started to bring back its heroes and maybe build some of the monuments. And I'm thinking, if this is Germany, how many Adolf Hitler boulevards are there in Germany?
Right.
But we have a lot of General Lee boulevards in the South. Why do you think that is? We've never gotten over that, right?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the South, perhaps they sort of lost the Civil War, but in a certain extent, they sort of won it as well. They certainly, they reduced former slaves to a type of slavery for years and years and years until the 60s. They weren't allowed to vote. They were kept.
So do you think it was Lincoln's death and the failure of Reconstruction that caused all that?
Well, my recollection is that what happened, which election was it? It was Harding, not Harding. What am I saying? Right after Grant, trying to remember the name of the president, but anyway, the election was close, and the Republicans, in order to
the 1876
right,
election.
the 1876 election, in order to keep the presidency, they basically gave away the rights of the black people in the South.
They said that the northern armies would leave the
Right.
South. They would no longer police the Reconstruction.
Right.
That was effectively the beginning of, the end of Reconstruction,
Right.
and the going forward of Jim Crow.
And
but it's not just Jim Crow. Look at the 1954, the school segregation, right?
Right.
How much integration have we had since then? There's been 100% resistance almost everywhere in the country.
That's true.
Have you taken a visit to Selma, Alabama? It's no different than it was in 1965.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I can't say that I'm aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So what happened is the white Southerners left the public schools and went to parochial schools and private schools. They left the public parks and started private pool clubs and private
Right.
country
Well,
clubs.
in Virginia, for a while there, they closed down the public schools.
Yeah.
And amazing, really. It's.
So we really, even though we've had a lot of good legislation, in practice, we really have not fulfilled what they wanted to do in the 1954 ruling. And they
Or
said,
for that matter, from this, of course, it's been undermined constantly, and I think now what we have is an administration that is essentially trying to bring it back.
Yeah.
This whole DEI thing is really just their way of saying we get to put white people first.
Yeah. Let's have some more white Afrikaners coming here.
Right. Yeah.
So let's go back. So you're in parochial school, in elementary school, and did you win the contest, or you win the? What did you
I
get?
think I did.
Did you
I
get
think
a
I
ribbon?
did.
What was your reward?
Well, that's the funny thing. It was. I can't remember. It was something relative. I think it was a holy picture or something.
Okay.
It was.
But it was American history that caught your interest more
Right.
than anything else.
Right. Yes. Okay. But because I read a lot of the landmark books, they're basically biographies of famous Americans. I think there was another series as well that was the same kind of thing.
And you continue that interest. Now, where did you go to junior high and high school?
Well, back in those days, grammar school went all the way through what's now junior high. So I graduated from the Catholic school in 8th grade, and then I went to Hartford Public High School, which was a complete change for me. For one thing, they weren't all Catholics, which and it was a wonderful school because there was all kinds of people there.
Hartford High School?
Hartford Public High School,
Yeah.
the second oldest high school in the country.
Really?
Yes, it's going to celebrate its 400th anniversary in about 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
And
Wasn't Hartford Courant one of the oldest newspapers in the country?
it is the oldest
It
newspaper.
is the oldest,
Yeah.
okay.
But Hartford High was, it was about 50% black. I remember, but it was all kinds of people there. We had a soccer team, which was the best soccer team in the state. And I think there was one person on it who was born in the United States. There's the South Americans,
Wow.
Europeans. It was just, so you got to know a lot of different people. And
So could you have gone to a Catholic high school?
If I had gone, I would have been able to go for free because I was the top boy in my class, but I didn't want to. And I really am so glad that did not happen. I mean,
So what was it like? Because I have friends who were Catholic, and some of them call themselves lapsed Catholics now, whatever that means. They went through, but they said they did get a fairly decent education.
It was.
What do you think?
Well, it was funny because where I lived in Hartford, okay, my father believed that the Catholic schools had a better education, but we were sort of on the very outskirts of the Noah Webster public school area, and the Noah Webster graduates were the only ones that when they went to high school got into the AP classes, or they had, it was the richest part of town.
Right.
We weren't in that rich part, but we were still on the outskirts of it. So I would have ended up going there. So had I gone to public schools, I would actually have had a leg up as far as the classes that I would have been in. But, we still got a good education, I think.
So was your family a dedicated Catholic family?
My father died when I was 9.
Oh.
And I used to say my prayers at night back then, and I always prayed, please let Daddy into heaven, but I knew he wouldn't go because he had committed a mortal sin every week because he had 2 jobs and he didn't go to church. So, it was, and
So
I don't think my parents
you
understood.
You were afraid that he was not going to go into heaven because he didn't go to church.
It's a mortal sin to not go to Mass every Sunday.
Wow.
That's the kind of thing. I mean, I don't think that my parents were aware that we were being told that sort of thing, and that those things were on.
So you were not a church-going family specifically.
We went to church the kids went to church.
Well, you had to because of the school.
Yes, because you had to sit with your classmates.
Right.
But
if you went to a public school in Hartford, you probably would not have gone to church. You don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But in any event, I think to a certain extent, if you're a thinking person, of Catholic grammar school education is the kind of education that produces quite a few agnostics and atheists.
Because you have to rebel, right?
Right.
I guess, yeah. I remember once when I was doing training teaching, we visited a Catholic church for a history class, and they had the answers to some of the tests the students had taken, and the first answer to one of the questions on the test was God in a history class.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
that's,
Well,
that
we
was
had
it.
the what do they call it? The Catholic. I can't remember the name of the religion textbook, catechism, and we had all these questions. Who made you? God made you.
Yeah,
Blah, blah,
so
blah,
God
blah.
was he was the first answer to every
Right.
quiz.
Yeah.
I'm sure, yeah, sure. And did you get taught against evolution? Was that a subject?
No, because I'll give them credit for that. The Catholic Church ultimately went along with that.
Oh, with evolution. Oh, that
Yes.
was okay.
Yeah, they agreed that had happened.
So that was back.
at
in the
some point, God breathed something into one of the apes
Okay.
or something. I don't know.
They rationalized
Right,
it. It
yeah,
worked out.
yeah.
It worked. And so now, how about now? Are you what is your religious
I
view
mean,
now?
agnostic, leaning atheist, I suppose.
Leaning what?
Leaning atheist. I can't see any evidence, but who knows?
You don't feel spirit of any kind? The spirit
really.
never moves you anywhere?
Well, I mean, the spirit may move me, but I'm not sure that there's any God behind it.
Do you go to church on Christmas? Do you do that?
No.
When was the last time you went to Mass?
I think when I was in college.
And so how did you and Mary, I know your wife Mary, how did you raise your 2 boys?
we just let them make up their own minds.
And so
about
what do
that
they
sort of
do
thing.
in terms of?
I don't think either one of them is a churchgoer or anything like
Okay,
that.
interesting.
And
The Catholic Church has spawned a lot of agnostics, I guess.
I think that's true, you know, and a lot of. It's funny. I looked up one of my old classmates recently because, for a number of reasons. But anyway, I found out that he had died, but he had become a priest.
Oh.
But then he switched to being a Protestant minister because he wanted to get married.
He wanted to get married.
And you know, that's the kind of thing you wonder. I mean, if they let priests get married, it would probably improve things
Or
quite a
let
bit.
women become priests or
Right.
whatever.
But
So, and actually, I'm sure you studied history, celibacy was not
Right.
in the beginning
until
of
about
the church.
I think it was the year 1000.
So
when
what was it? They just wanted to make sure that you left nothing to anyone else but the church after you died.
Well, I think supposedly it was to prevent nepotism, because you know, the priests would, I don't know, pass things on to their own children or
Right.
something
They
along
didn't
those
want
lines.
that, right.
But you know, you could prevent that without having to.
But I mean, it's a huge generalization, but the church was probably the only literary force and governing force during the Dark Ages, right?
Yeah.
I got to give them credit for that.
Right.
But, all right, so so history, why didn't you become an attorney? What did you major in college?
History.
Okay, and why did you decide to go to law school and not become a history professor like your son?
Well, you know, it's funny. I think when we were kids, my father had predicted that my younger brother would become a lawyer, and that sort of made me think, well, I'm going to be a lawyer too. And so that was part of it. And I also had political ambitions, which never came to pass. But I thought, well, you really need to be being a lawyer is a step toward, you know,
Yeah, right.
some political office. So that's the way I went.
Yeah, I know, because I've seen you've been around state conventions and all the political stuff. I've seen you a million times over the years.
Yeah.
Why didn't you try to run for office?
I did, but I was terrible at it. I mean, for one thing, I wasn't good at knocking on doors, which is something that you really need to be able to do. You know, that's the way
And
to
you
get.
need to have a little. You don't have any narcissism. You need a little bit of narcissism, don't you? A little bit.
Well, I suppose that's probably true when you look at the politicians that get the most.
You need to be able to toot your own horn when you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was. You know. I mean, I was always a little hesitant to knock on somebody's door and to, and for running for local office, that's really important. I mean, the
Right.
people who do well. And, you know, I give them credit. I wish that I was capable of
But
that.
you needed a mentor. You needed somebody to push you and tell you
Right.
what to do and what to say and how to do it and all of that.
Right.
And you never found somebody like that.
Well, I can't pretend that I looked for somebody like that.
But it's still fun to be it's a big, good, I mean, it's a spectator sport that I know you and I have enjoyed over the years very, very much, doing the background work and, you know, helping leaders and helping, probably teaching and guiding some along the way.
At least at a local level in Groton, we've done, you know, our chair, Natalie Billing, has done a wonderful job. I mean, I think, you know, about 10 years ago, the town council was like, I think we had one Democrat on it. Now I think there might be one Republican. I'm not positive about that. And I think there were two people responsible for that. One was Natalie, who was very good at getting things together and getting things organized, and Donald Trump, because I think a lot of the votes were reactions to the fact that he was, you know.
Well, that's interesting, because I always thought of Groton as more of a working class Democratic town. Am I wrong?
You would have been wrong until about 8 or 9 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, of course, things have switched now, because now more of the wealthier classes and more educated classes are more Democratic than they used to be,
Right.
too. So that's changing.
But I think that's the case. I mean, but Groton is a funny town because it's a mix of all kinds of different.
You got the base people. You have.
And we've got some very wealthy areas, Groton, Long Point,
Right.
and
Is Noank part of Groton?
It is. In
Okay.
fact,
That's where you live, yeah.
Yeah, I have a Noank address, although
Right.
I'm not in the village, so it's sort of iffy. But yeah, Noank and of course half of Mystic and.
So you grew up in the Hartford area. So what brought you to southeastern Connecticut?
A job.
What?
I got my job at Legal Services in New London. Okay. So we moved to the first place we lived was in the city of Groton, right near the Fort Griswold, and then we eventually moved into Mystic for a while, and then got our house in.
All right. So you were always interested in history. You always read history, but you decided to become a lawyer because you were goaded into it by somebody saying that your brother should be a lawyer. So
sort of, yeah.
Oh, is your brother a lawyer?
He did become a lawyer. First, he became a psychologist, and then he got his law degree.
Oh, that's a good
and
combination.
He now works. He's got at least the last I heard, he's got a business where he helps other lawyers choose juries because of his
so he's like a jury consultant.
Yeah,
that's
that's
a very interesting job.
Yeah.
That's a really great, that's interesting and important, I guess, what they say. So how have you use the word that you're on the left. I always wonder what that means when they say, well, I don't like the Democrats, they're too left. What does that mean? What is left in America? I don't think it's very left.
Well, I mean, I guess it's another word for liberal, and to me it's.
Well, now they use progressive instead of liberal.
Right. But
what does it mean?
To me, all of those terms I take to mean that you care about doing the right thing for other people. For instance, that people should be able to have health care even if they can't afford these skyrocketing insurance rates, or they should be able to get a good education. They should be treated fairly when they, if they apply to a college or to that they should be judged on their merits. That sort of thing. And there's a whole bunch of things. I just think that
there's the DEI bugaboo, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The so-called right wing is saying that that's really reverse discrimination. That's
that's what they're saying. But what they're really doing is they're using it as a weapon in order to reinstate something along the Jim Crow lines.
Exactly. But I read a great article that said the Republican Party knows how to use words better, knows how to define things. We're using their vocabulary, not ours, and they know how to milk a scandal a hell of a lot better.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that bothers me is the willingness of the Democrats or the people, whatever you want to call them, people on the left, to accept their terminology. I mean, I think think back when the whole abortion issue came along, and the anti-abortion people called themselves pro-life, and the pro-abortion people went along with it and actually used that term. And now, instead of
that term was not from the pro-abortion people? The left created that term?
No, we didn't create it, but we used it.
We used it.
Which gives them. I mean, here they are. Setting the terms of debate, so to speak, and we're accepting it. Another example, which is present day, is the use of the term Christian nationalist. Now, most people have a good, the word Christian does not turn them off, it turns them on. Right. It makes them feel like, oh, that's a good thing. And nationalist doesn't really have any kind of connotation at all. But what these people actually are is fascists. And people know that fascists are bad. But we go along and call them Christian nationalists. I mean, even the blogs that I go to, which try to avoid that sort of thing most of the time, they use the term. I mean, I can't understand it.
It's interesting. So I've read and think the political scientists demark the time of Reagan when our vocabulary switched. Because up until then, it was the Roosevelt era, the New Deal. We talked in terms of the kind of compassion and doing good. And what did Reagan do? He came into office and said, the worst thing a government does is being government. I'm the president of this organization and it's terrible. What what leader comes in and tells you that your government is terrible and is not there for you and you shouldn't trust it? That's what he did. And he created a situation where the government was no longer ours. It was something terrible out there that we should despise. And that's the way the parties distinguish themselves.
Well,
now.
I think another thing that bothers me too is, if you remember 25, maybe 30 years ago, the Republicans started complaining about the liberal media and constantly criticizing the media for supposedly being liberal. So what did the media do? It kept moving the definition of middle in the direction that the Republicans wanted it to go. They constantly do this both sides stuff where they, you know, they accept that, hey, you have a good argument, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so we now have a situation, for instance, where the press wants to talk about Joe Biden's mental capacity, even though he's not even president, but they ignore the obvious problems with Donald Trump. And, you know, a couple of weeks ago, one of the possible candidates for governor of Connecticut, I won't mention names, came to our Groton Democratic Town Committee meeting, and I basically made this complaint. I said, look, you've got to start, the Democrats have to start working the ref. You have to start attacking the press for not covering these things in the way that they should be covering them. And his response was, well, we don't want to do that because we believe in freedom of the press. Well, it's got nothing to do with freedom of the press.
Right.
You know,
well, we should have more press conferences. We should try to get on the same. It's hard because I accept that we're the left, the liberals, are a more diverse group. We're tolerant of other views, I hope. And so therefore it's hard for us to come to a consensus and repeat the same spiel and lie over and over and over again, which is what we're up against. How do you do that?
Yeah, you got a good point there. But I do think it is the case. I mean, you watch some of these speeches that Trump makes. Clearly, the man is not all there. And yet that does not get anywhere near the publicity.
Well, we've kind of normalized him, and the point is, he is in our face 24/7.
Right. But you know, you're not going to get the media to pay attention to that issue if you don't call them and tell them that they should
I think,
be.
You know, if you. Fox is not the media; it is the propaganda. It is the national propaganda channel.
But I'm talking about
that's what it is.
Even the New York Times.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes it drives you nuts how he'll give a speech and 90% of it will be this blather, and they'll cover it as if it's he's making. And then you get down to the last paragraph, and they'll finally get around to saying something about the fact that most of what he said didn't make any sense. But nobody gets to the last paragraph.
You've got the opinion writers and the editorial pages. I think the reporters, I think we still have to have journalistic standards, and the reporters should not be taking a political stand.
I'm not suggesting that they take a side, so to speak, but I do think that if somebody gives a speech in which most of what he says is disjointed, then you don't go and try to come up with a logical,
Well, it bothers me when people assign certain amount of strategic thinking to him. There is no such thing. All right, let's go back. So I want to know, so what was your first involvement? When was the first time you voted? I mean, you don't have
I know that I went to register to vote the day after I turned. I guess back then the voting age was 21. Was it 21 or 18? Anyway, registered the day after my birthday.
I think it was 21 back then. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be. Well, let's see.
Who was the first president you voted for?
Well, the first non-president I voted for, I believe, was George McGovern.
Oh, I meant presidential election, right?
Yeah, right.
Non-president. Okay, that was 1972.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I wanted to ask you, so you've been involved ever since. What is the most exciting election that you ever participated in?
The most exciting?
Yeah, that was, seemed to be had the most interest.
Well, I guess, I guess maybe it was Clinton because we were taking it back, and it was We actually went to D.C. to watch his inauguration.
I
It
was
fun.
I was a delegate at the Clinton convention.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the best convention ever in New York City at Madison Square Garden. That was terrific. So yeah, he did. I didn't real. He was very centrist, wasn't he? He was not
Yeah.
on the left, but I think we all felt we needed to win the election
yeah,
from
yeah.
Bush, and so
Yeah.
Paul Tsongas was the alternative, but he was ill, if you remember.
Geez, I don't ever remember
Yeah,
Paul.
he was a Massachusetts senator who was ill, and that was much more liberal choice. But yeah. So that was exciting. I think. Well, were you in Connecticut with Father Duffy?
Yes.
That was it was in '70.
Right.
Because that was a very exciting time, because that was when Tom Dodd had been censured by this Congress.
I remember that, yeah.
And he did what Lieberman did later. He ran as an independent, and so he messed up and Joe Duffy was a minister who really captivated the imagination of a lot of us. Do you remember him at all?
I do remember.
Yes. He won the primary against a more, moderate, safe Democrat. But in a three-way, that's how we got Lowicka, in a three-way between this Joe Duffy, who was the Democrat, and Tom Dodd, who screwed everything up by running as independent. Lowicka came in as a Republican senator.
But you could give him credit. He was, at least he stuck to his guns in terms of his issues, and he didn't.
He was a star in the Watergate Commission against us,
right.
Absolutely.
And when you think back, you think, what Nixon was, the worst things Nixon was accused of doing are nothing compared to what these people are doing every day.
Well, the other thing is that's so interesting is that Nixon, maybe he was a crook, maybe he was a cheat, maybe he was a liar, it's despicable, whatever you want to call him, he still had a sense of the gravity of the ceremonial part of being president. He resigned with fanfare. He had a breakfast. He had a going away party at the plane, and he did his thing. He had the majesty of the presidency still was with him after he resigned. He knew that it meant something. There are no norms left, right?
Yeah.
There's no norms. There's no proper ethics or etiquette to the way things go.
My wife and I, when we take long trips, like we went to Vermont for the weekend. That's where we went to the No Kings demonstration in Chester, Vermont, where we have a little second home. But we listened to a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin that's about the 60s, when her husband, Dick Goodwin. And, you listen and we just listened to the part where the Civil Rights Act was enacted. And, Democrats and Republicans both were part of getting that through. And nowadays, I don't think you could get a single Republican to vote for it.
No.
And it's really a shame what's happened, and that.
Well, they're all going to probably vote for this terrible reconciliation financial bill.
Right. Not only that, there's that bill that they want to change the elections. They want to essentially make it almost impossible for some people to vote. You like to think that perhaps...
Well, it's going to take a lot of people off the rolls, and you're not going to be able to get back on.
Right.
I know. Yeah,
I mean,
that's not
if you're a woman who changed her name when she got married, proving that you had...
Their job is to cut the rolls so they can win.
Although you like to think that some of those things might rebound against them. I mean, but who knows?
Who knows? I hope the backlash is going to be nice and fast. I don't know. Yeah. We'll talk about that. All right, so most exciting, you said, was the Clinton. What was the most surprising?
Well,
most surprising thing that you, in all your years of looking at politics?
That's a good question, but I'm not sure I have an answer. Let me see.
Maybe Trump winning in 2016? Although that also goes in the next category, most disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's funny because sometimes I look back on, I did a lot more blogging back then than I do now. And, I sort of went back and forth that year about whether or not he, it was hard to believe that he could win. And yet there were signs even then that it could happen. To be honest with you, I really thought that there was no way he could win this last time, but obviously I was wrong. And I mean, I just think it's a shame that, I suspect that there was a lot of, prejudice involved in that whole situation.
How much anti-woman?
Anti-woman, well, anti-black, although they said she was not black for purposes of one thing, but then again, and it's just really a shame. And it's so funny to read about these people. Some of them, well, I didn't vote for this. That it's well, yeah, you did vote for it.
Yeah, but aren't we? We come from we're tribal in the sense that, Clinton did some bad stuff. I mean, he could have been the best president ever. He was probably the smartest president we ever had. I really believe that. But it was very disappointing to see what he couldn't accomplish because of his personal foibles. And many of us didn't recognize that because why? We're tribal. We went along and kept, supporting him and voting for him. And so I can see, it's hard to admit. I mean, there's nobody around who would ever admit now they voted for Richard Nixon. It's hard to admit that you made a mistake. It's hard to admit that, and you're tribal. And they'd rather be against the DEI and the trans and the immigrants. I think that the third of the country that is with Trump loves that stuff. They love the anti-trans stuff. They love the anti-immigrant stuff. And I think it was even more important than the price of eggs, actually.
Well, yeah, and of course, a lot of it has to do with the fact that so many people get all of their news from Fox, and so they're fed this propaganda over and over and over again, and it's all they hear and all they know. So that's part of it.
And when you try to have a conversation with one of them, and you want to send them information that they could learn something new or different, they won't let you because if they'll tell you that it's from a source that's too left. You can't send them something from the Times or the Washington Post or a magazine that's too liberal. They don't believe it.
Well, some of these issues, like the whole trans thing, I mean, you're talking about a
what
very small percentage of people, and how does it hurt you one way or the other?
But Joe, we live in Connecticut, so we don't see all the national ads that go out because they assume we're voting Democratic, so they don't bother to waste money on us. But they put out about 40,000 ads making sure that you would be worried that your daughter was going to get raped by a migrant and then probably killed by the migrant. That was like 40. And the same number of ads about this trans stuff, because at one time they asked Kamala, she never brought it up in the campaign in general, but at one time she was interviewed and there was something about a prisoner getting some medical assistance in a transformation something. And she said something about, well, we have to support, whatever, support. They used that to the hilt, and there were like 40,000 ads against the trans thing. And, you talk to some people who voted Democratic who still are upset that this one trans woman is playing soccer with their daughter. They don't like it. So there may be some science involved. I don't know. That's another issue.
That's one of the things I don't. The athletic thing, I don't know enough about it to have an opinion. I don't know.
But people get really excited about that stuff, and I think that I think was more important than the eggs. But I don't. Maybe not.
I don't know. All I know is the price of eggs has gone up ever since he got in.
So what was more surprising, this 2024 or 2016?
That's a good question, and I think they were both. It was. Let's put it this way: it wasn't. In neither case was surprise something that I felt was more like depression. In both cases. And
what about most disappointing?
Well, I would say 2024.
Yeah.
And
I've always said we Democrats have sabotaged ourselves so many times. What about 2000 Gore? What about 2004? What they did to Kerry? What about Nixon in 1968? And Humphrey was a great man; he should have won. And Nixon committed treason with the Viet Cong by telling them don't make a deal with Johnson wanted to make a deal for
Right.
peace.
Well, look at the
And Reagan did the same thing.
Right.
He committed treason. Look at all those elections that the Republicans did some really bad stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it started with Nixon. Again, going back to this book I was just reading. We listened to in the car. That LBJ, when he signed the Civil Rights Act, or around that time, said something to the effect that we've lost the South for a generation. And, Nixon decided that, well, okay, we'll take it. And in order to take it, we will play to those prejudices and everything else.
The silent majority, that was a dog whistle.
And, and Reagan, when he announced for president, his candidacy in 1980, where did he go? Philadelphia, Mississippi. And, talked about states' rights, and, so it was...
And the welfare queens, he did that.
Yeah.
With the Cadillac, the welfare queens and their Cadillacs.
Yeah. It's funny because I was representing welfare queens at the time, and I don't remember any of them having a Cadillac.
But
in fact, I was always amazed that anybody could live on the amount of money that a welfare person was getting. Think back, and this is like 1980. I think it was something like $300 a month.
But then when you talk to Republicans who may have been your friends or family members, who they're like I call the country club Republicans. They vote Republicans. They think for some reason that the economy does better under Republicans, which isn't true.
Right.
Almost every depression, recession we've had, it's happened, and then Obama had to come up and clean it up, and Clinton came up and cleaned it up, and Biden came up and cleaned it up. But when you say to them that that Nixon brought in a racist element, and so did Reagan, they don't believe you.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think a lot of people, they're not that terribly interested in politics, and they've sort of inherited their party affiliation maybe from their parents, and so they just vote, and don't even give it a whole lot of thought. I mean, I think maybe that's changing a little bit.
I don't know.
I'm hoping, you can be a little bit hopeful. I mean, those demonstrations last weekend were
They were great.
Yeah, and it was, I understood you went to Boston too.
I was in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and Fairhaven, Massachusetts, the next town over, because we have a place in Mattapoisett. My husband grew up in New Bedford, that's why we were there.
Oh.
And that was kind of fun. And it was great being on the road, and you probably saw that too, people honking, and it was a festive kind of air, but the signs were all
Well, we had,
great.
this is now, Trester's not a big town. We had 570 people on the green demonstrating, and we had one counter demonstrator.
Really?
Who was, he was sort of so foolish that you sort of wondered if he was just mocking counter demonstrators. And a whole bunch of people he was going around with this Trump flag, and a bunch of people were following him with their anti-Trump signs, and so it was, and nobody bothered, nobody.
But it was peaceful.
Very peaceful.
But what do you think about the fact that we have a very, in general, unengaged electorate? Because this is just an estimate. So 33% of all adults over the age of 18 eligible to vote voted for Trump. Maybe 32% voted for Harris. And what about the other 33%?
Yeah,
they never even bothered to register to vote.
Yeah.
What do we do about that?
That's a good question. I don't, it may be some of this stuff will motivate people. Whether or not it motivates them to vote correctly or not is another question, I guess. But I do think that, there must be some of these Republicans in Congress who are representing districts where it hasn't been gerrymandered sufficiently for them to just know that they're going to get reelected, who have to start thinking about, there's a lot of people who are energized against them. And, who knows, maybe.
I think the political scientists have said that those people who are out in the shadows, who are not voting, if they would vote, they'd probably be more likely to vote Democratic than Republican. But because I don't know, but that is an issue. And what about the fact that you're involved in local, as you said, in local politics? Why do only 20, 30, sometimes less % of people vote in their local elections when that's where you get all your local services and more important in some
Yeah.
ways than national.
Well, what's really depressing, and I'm glad we don't, and I can take some credit for this, we don't have budgetary elections in Groton.
You
We
don't have to have
vote
a
on,
referendum for
yeah, right, and which is good because the turnout, for instance, Ledyard just had an election and they voted down a tax increase, and of course it means the schools take the hit. You know, the turnout was, you know, I think less than 20%. And so you're not really getting a representative sampling of the people at all. And I think a lot of people don't even know it's happening.
Yeah.
So it's really a shame. And so,
Well, so
you know.
you know Timothy Snyder, of course, the professor he was from Princeton, now he's gone up to, not Princeton, Yale. He wrote a book on tyranny, and now he's got one on freedom. He talks about how democracies can turn into authoritarian dictatorships. He says one of the biggest problems of losing our democracy is the loss of local newspapers.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. You know, I mean, we still have the Day, although sometimes it drives me crazy because.
But does it do each town? Does it have a section for each town?
No, I mean, I don't think they have they used to have quite a few reporters.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think they have too many anymore. And whoever writes their headlines, I think, is pretty far on the right. I mean, you know, there was a headline a couple of days ago about how the Marines or the soldiers were in L.A. to protect ICE. I mean, to protect ICE? Give me a break.
Right.
You know,
right.
I mean, but anyway. And we still have the Current up in Hartford, so that's good. But you know, I think that's true.
When people don't have a newspaper and they don't know what's going on in their community, and they're commuters or they work in a town a half hour away, they don't feel like they have a stake or that they really belong. They don't have an attachment to the town.
Yeah.
That's part of it. So why bother to vote? Because
Well, I don't know what the turnout is in Groton. I think it's probably a little bit higher than the norm, but.
That's what 30%. I mean, it's really something. And even in the midterm elections, the congressional elections, when we have our state elections, it doesn't get that high. Maybe 60%. I don't know.
Yeah.
Secretary of State gave awards, because I know living in Colchester, we got an award for high participation in our local election. It was very, very low, but it was one of the highest ones. So she gave out awards trying to drum up interest in the local elections to see if more people will come out and vote, but they're very low. All right, I want to show you've been doing this blog thing. What is a blogger, first of all, John?
Well, I've been doing it for about 20 years now. It's an online, I think they would call it a journal, but basically you can write a little piece about anything you want, and anybody who wants to read it can read it.
And yours is called CT
Mine's called
Blue.
CT Blue. Back in the
CT Blue.
Back in the olden days, there were like 4 or 5 of us Connecticut bloggers, but Connecticut sort of Democratic type bloggers.
Right.
But I think I'm the only one still putting something out every now and then. I mean, I used to do it just about every day.
Because you write well. Did you ever think of writing a book or articles or op-ed pieces or something?
I actually did write one op-ed in response to something that our former Republican Representative John Scott had written about tolls. But anyway, I thought about writing a book, but only very, very briefly, and I've never really done it. But like I said, my son wrote a book.
Well, let's just take a look at what some of the pages look like. So there it is. So now you wrote on June 8th. I assume that's Musk and...
right.
Yeah, so you wrote about Musk. And then on the right-hand side, you have links that people can go to, different things.
Right, yeah. You can see that there's some of them are a long time ago.
Yeah.
Dodd fundraiser, July 2009.
Archives, you can look at your archives.
Yeah.
So, all right, go on to the next page. Now, this one was interesting, 1984. I like this story because it was in Oklahoma, where even though it's a Republican state, you said people were mad about them trying to change the curriculum, the education curriculum.
Right.
What were they trying to do?
I have to...
They were trying to change American. They were trying to talk about the 2020 election.
Right. They wanted to teach the kids that the 2020 election was stolen, even though, of course, there's absolutely no evidence that that's the case.
So even though
and
it's
so-
a Republican area, a Trump area,
Right.
these people are rising up and saying, no, you can't do that.
Right, and the interesting thing was that they were using one of those statutes that the Republicans have put in that allow parents to sue school systems to stop them from teaching things that they object to.
Yeah.
So they were utilizing something that probably shouldn't even exist.
Yeah.
But for a good end,
Yeah.
and I don't know how it's all going to work out, but. But
Well,
that's the kind of thing, that it would be terrible if we start teaching our kids basically, a false history.
Well, that's what
which
they
is-
want, or they want to whitewash history.
Right.
You
I
use
guess,
that expression.
But the idea that you would go that far and teach what is obviously a lie, usually
Yeah.
it's a little bit more subtle than that.
Yeah.
But
I think I have another page or two to show from the blogs. Is there another page? Oh, there are
Hey,
Nazis after all.
I spelled it right.
But
How did that
liberals
extra
should
A get on
stick
there?
in other words, the whole idea that we're calling Trump doing Nazi things, that Musk gave a Nazi salute, some people
Right.
object to that. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems to me that you call a spade, so to speak, and like for instance, the things that they're doing with ICE, those are, personally, I think one of the things that the Democrats should start doing is calling those people Trump's Gestapo, because that's the way they behave, and to do that sort of thing, to take people off the street, ship them out of the country without and without really any evidence against them. And one of the things that I suspect is that, like, for instance, there was a story about a woman down in one of the southern states who had been living in this town for like 20 years. Most of the people there liked her, and the ICE just came and took her away. And, if there's one person in town who doesn't like you that calls ICE and say, hey, there's somebody, and the next thing you know, they're gone.
Well, you're getting back to language again. We need to. Do we have Democrats in Washington who have the courage to use the strong language and use the word Gestapo?
I'm not.
Really do it?
One of the things
Yeah.
I think that's sort of it's too bad is that I don't think it's too many of the politicians in D.C. still think it's the olden days when they could actually get along with their Republican counterparts and work with them and that sort of thing. I mean, I personally think that people like AOC, they know what's going on, and not only that, they know how to use social media to communicate with people, but they're being iced out. I mean, she wanted to be the chair of one of these committees, and they put this old guy on who died about 6 months later, and now they put another old guy on there. And, he doesn't have the capability of getting them a message out, whereas, she could do that.
When you mean Congressman Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Right.
Yeah. So when you say AOC, not everybody knows.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What that means. No, but that's okay. Everybody knows.
And
So,
I think getting the younger people involved
and
it's important.
using the language and getting everybody on the same page. We could do the same kind of things they do and repeating over and over again. Why don't they have a press conference every single day and list all the things? Because another thing you did is a compendium of stuff that Trump has done.
Right, yeah.
And why don't they do that every day and list them?
I have to update that, I think, because what it was every example of corruption, or just open corruption. I mean, they don't even pretend.
It's out because people say if it's out in the open, then it can't be a crime.
Yeah, well, that's what one of them said.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, he's not hiding it, so it's not a problem.
It's amazing. I know.
But,
all right, so in the next few minutes, what are you worried about? What's some of your predictions about what's going to happen over the next years?
Well, I don't. Sometimes you try to be optimistic, and sometimes you're pessimistic. I mean, I'm just. What I worry about, I think, most is that they will basically make it impossible for there to be fair elections, so that they will get people in office who they choose, and sort of like in Russia, where the elections are they're shams. The winner is known beforehand.
But so many of our states, especially the blue states with the biggest populations, they're in control of Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures.
well,
But
that's
you're right. With the Electoral College, it could be just a few purple states that make the difference.
And unfortunately, I think, the sainted founding fathers made a terrible error in terms of the Senate. I mean, we have a Senate that is controlled by perhaps people representing maybe 20% of the country. I mean, you think about it, you've got 2 senators from California where there are more people than in probably 10 states that have 10 times the amount of representation in the Senate. And so that's not good either, but I just
can't have a constitutional convention. Who knows what would happen with
right.
that?
I know.
That would be a
Yeah.
disaster,
And,
probably.
But
Even
there's
though we
also
need one.
gerrymandering in even in the red states. You're not getting the number of. I mean, one of the things I'd like to see, which of course will never happen, is that we, instead of voting electing by districts, should just elect by party. You vote for your, the party puts forth a list of candidates for, let's say, Congress. And if the party gets 60% of the vote, then 60% of their candidates get in. And
we're not a parliamentary democracy.
Right,
That's
I know.
the problem.
But
yeah.
it would be so
right.
much more. But anyway, what I do worry about is that.
You worry about that. So let me ask you this final question. Some people say that Trump is just an aberration. I mean, we latched on to his celebrities. I mean, without that show, he might not have won, I think. And that we'll get back to somehow the norms of our country and we'll get over him. And other people think, no, this is like the beginning of the end. What's your thinking?
Well, I mean, it depends on what day you ask me. Some days I feel like we can make it through it, and other days I'm not sure. But what all I can say is I have 3 grandchildren, and I worry about what kind of a world they're going to grow up in. I hope that we can overcome this, and I do think that the people who are sort of behind him, like people like Vance, there's no way that Vance could sell himself like Reagan did. I mean, like Trump did, even though I can't understand how Trump did it, but Vance is just awful at it. And so, at least that's one hopeful sign, is that I don't see a successor who can pull it off like Trump did.
That's a good point. All right, last thing, I know I said, you love history. Give me the names of 3 of the best history books that somebody who wants to be learned and know about American history has said.
Geez. Well, I wish I could. Well, like I say, I really still like that book about Tom Paine, but that was just Citizen Tom Paine. This is the part of being of aging. My son's book, which actually won a prize as the best.
What's the name?
Well, that's the problem. I'm trying to remember.
What's his name? We'll look it up.
It's Peter Wirzbicki.
Peter Wirzbicki at Princeton. Okay.
At Princeton, right? And it's like I said.
And all of Doris Kearns Goodwin's books.
Yeah. Well, the book we're listening to is quite good. It does make you miss those days when people were behaving somewhat responsibly.
Okay.
Although even then, they had to overcome. But it was within the Democratic Party that the really bad people were. But they all switched to being Republicans as soon as.
Right. Okay, John. Keep reading, keep blogging, and keep your fingers crossed.
Okay,
That's what we're
we'll
gonna
do.
All right, we'll see everybody next time on Talkback. Bye. Okay, we went.